But I remember having this profound realization that I was on a ladder that I didn't want to be on. I wanted breathing space around the work, and that just wasn't possible in soap. You're really up against it. It's very, very fast. So you're working very hard, but possibly not in the way you want to. You're working hard in the wrong areas. And so I just felt like I've made some good friends and learned a lot, but now I just want something different. And making that choice, opportunities just came.
Hello, how are you doing? Welcome back to the Spiritual Psychology of Acting podcast. This week's episode features a conversation with English actor Martin Delaney. After getting his start as a child actor on stage in London's West End, Martin went on to star in the Nickelodeon television series Renford Rejects. In the 25 years that have followed, Martin has carved out a career for himself that has included soaps, sitcoms, indie films and big-budget American movies, working with the likes of Clint Eastwood, George Clooney and Catherine Bigelow. In our chat, we discuss Martin's diverse body of work, the acting journey he's been on, and find out what he's learnt about the industry along the way. So, without further ado, let's get into it. It's a pleasure to welcome actor Martin Delaney to the podcast today. How are you doing today, Marty?
Very good. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming. How are you, John?
I'm really well, and I'm really glad that we've got Marty on. And Marty's got a lot of, he's been in the industry since he was a child. He started out as a child, so he's been through the whole ropes up to this great guy that we see sitting next to us today. And Marty's also, he did my course and did my workshops, and we got to know each other that way. And he's a absolute fountain of knowledge about the industry itself, having been in it since childhood. So I really hope that we can glean some of Marty's golden nuggets today.
Great, lots to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, it's always nice to start off with context of you, obviously saying you started off very young, but it's nice to know how acting came into your life. Where did it all first start for you?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, it's a weird one because it's started, it's like watching sort of competition puzzle and you see it all come into place like years later. Film was really important in my house growing up. So my dad watched a lot of film and we would always recreate the cinema at home. My dad thought film needed to be watched in a certain way in the dark and, and no talking. So I had quite a theatrical relationship with cinema growing up. But then I started acting at school. I remember being a teenager and going to school and my teachers saying, you should try, auditioning for a play or whatever. And I was quite a cheeky kid, I think, growing up, but I was quite shy at school. And I did a couple of plays and started getting into it that way. And then I basically did an open audition for a musical in the West End. Now, I didn't have any singing or background training. I was quite scared, I think, of singing and dancing and all that kind of stuff. I didn't have any kind of experience in that world, but I did Oliver at school and really enjoyed it after doing a couple of plays at school. I auditioned for Oliver when it was coming into the West End in 95, 94, and Jonathan Pryce was playing Fagin and Sam Mendes was directing it and bringing it back to the West End. And I went to an open audition. I queued up with thousands of kids, so the sort of PR stunt to sort of get people to come and watch the show in a few months' time. And I got a letter saying, we want you to come back and audition again and kept going to these rounds. And I remember my parents didn't know anything about acting. My parents didn't know how to get into the industry, anything about it. My dad was just a big British comedy fan, American comedy fan, and film fan. And so I just phoned up this children's agent that my cousin was with, and they sort of listened to me sing, and they said, we'll take you on. And it was Sylvia Young's school, and they had an agency. And they then sort of prepped me for the remaining auditions and go into the singing classes and and practice a bit more. And eventually I got a letter saying, yeah, you're in it. You're in Oliver. But you're in the second cast. So we're sort of going to start with this other cast and you're coming in then. You've got a place. So I just started going to other auditions. I went to another audition for a musical that was happening across Christmas, Peter Pan. And I ended up getting that. So I was literally doing Peter Pan and Oliver in the West End, back to back. And they were the two plays I did at school. They were the two plays that got me into acting at school. I did Peter Pan, Oliver, and then I went on and did them in the West End. And the weirdest thing was that Ron Moody was Hook in my Peter Pan. And I'd grown up watching Oliver. And I was like, fucking hell, Fagin's Hook in Peter Pan. So it was a really weird, serendipitous process, really. Because all of a sudden I was singing and dancing in the West End and then doing the odd play and then started to sort of transition across and do TV and film, really. But I think just lucky, really. There's a weird thing about the power of intention, of thinking I know and want to do that. And especially when you're a child, really, because you don't have the fears and stuff that come up. I mean, I was a teenager and I'd really only realised that I wanted to be an actor in that period, a year before, thinking, no, this is for me, this is the thing.
So was there a real drive there then? Because that takes quite a lot of, especially like you're saying as a teenager, to then say, oh, I need to go get an agent. It wasn't anything that was, spearheaded by your parents or any other kind of adult figures that were kind of giving you tips and tricks and stuff about how to get into the industry. Was it just a pure love and a real desire to get into it that kind of drove you to contact these agents and to stick with it?
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember, like I say, my parents being like, what? Like when I said I was going to do it, they didn't know how to help or what to do. But there was a lot of drive that came from different places. For example, I remember watching shows when I was young, just thinking, that's not believable. You are in a medieval castle in the middle of why don't I believe that you really are? And I remember thinking I could do that and believe it. So there was that sense, and I always had a really vivid imagination as a youngster. My dad was a big Shakespeare fan. He was from a working class Irish family, but he was a big Shakespeare fan. And so I had I had a good cinematic education and we watched a range of different projects at home. So I was watching films at home when I was sort of too young, watching Cuckoo's Nest when I was sort of 5 years old or something, But so there was certainly when I was like, oh, this is fun to do and exciting to do, and the imagination that I'm tapping into is exciting. That was an addictive quality, and in honesty, there were difficulties in my home life growing up. There were things going on with my parents. The acting became a therapeutic journey for me to sort of understand what was going on for them as individuals, but also what was going on for me. So it was somewhere for me to hide and be. So that was there was quite a drive in that sense too. I wanted to find my thing, the thing that I was really excited about, and that really made sense.
Yeah.
And yet, looking back, it's just a collection of. I was always being educated in a way for that journey, really. And actually, the first film job I got, which was after I did Oliver, the first screen job I got was a film. It was a very small part, but the first film job I got was a movie in Amsterdam. It was a war film, and the lead was Paul Schofield, and the antagonist was Malcolm McDowell. And I'd grown up watching their films. I was obsessed with Branagh's Henry V, and so knew Paul's sort of French King really well, and I'd watched a few Malcolm McDowell films. So it was really strange to then be working with him. And Paul and my dad stayed friends until Paul died. He was hugely supportive of my career, even when I was turning up in episodes of The Bill, and stuff like that. He was, very, very kind and generous.
So what was that transition period then like for you? Obviously, starting and getting success as a teenager. A lot of child actors can kind of crash and burn because it becomes too early, or there's too much pressure. What was that kind of transition period like for you? becoming an adult actor and those parts
Yeah.
changing and there's kind of different projects coming your way? What was that like?
Yeah, so I mean, interestingly, I looked young. So I looked younger than I was, but I was at the age where I wanted to, where most people are making decisions about their career path. You know, like if you're taking your GCSEs, if you want to be a geologist, you're already taking geography and something, you know, sort of mathematical maybe. So you're already knowing sort of what you want to do at uni. I was at that age where I was like, well, I want to be doing this. So I started to make those decisions. And I just knew I wanted to do that. But yes, obviously there's a transition that happens. It felt like my choice. I think that was the difference. You know, like some child actors, it's a decision a parent has made for them when they're a bit younger, before they have any autonomy.
Yeah.
I was making the call on it. But yeah, I mean, in the path to getting to an adult actor, I sort of committed every cardinal sin in acting. I was saying to you, I was in a kids show for 4 years, and it was a lovely show, and I learned a lot on it. And that was Nickelodeon's first UK project. So they made like Sister Sister and Keenan and Kel and all these American shows. And their first British show was a show called Renford Rejects about a really bad five-a-side football team. And I was the captain of that team. So I was this very London, working class, mouthy kid. And then I went into a soap. I left that and committed another cardinal sin and went into soap for 3 years, and had this sort of life of being, you know, wallpaper in people's houses that was on all the time. So you kind of there's a weird attention that comes with being in a soap that I found quite uncomfortable. Actually, I've just found quite difficult. For some reason, I didn't expect that if I was in something that was popular, that it would be uncomfortable with the public, and people would want to talk to you about it or want a piece of it. And I wasn't quite ready for that as a young person. But I remember leaving that soap opera in England. I was in it for 3 years. I was nominated for a couple of awards and stuff at the soap awards and things. But I remember having this profound realization that I was on a ladder that I didn't want to be on, that I was working in an area. I really enjoyed working in soap, and I really admired all the technical teams and the actors that worked in it, because you do work very, very hard. And at the same time, I wanted breathing space around the work. I was craving spending just that bit longer on scenes and doing stuff in a slightly more thoughtful way. And that just wasn't possible in soap. You're really up against it. It's very, very fast. So you're working very hard, but possibly not in the way you want to. You know, you're working hard in the wrong areas. And so I just felt like this is enjoyable. I've made some good friends and learned a lot, but now I just want something different. And making that choice, opportunities just came. I remember thinking I wanted to do more American work, and stuff started to happen in that. It just started to happen. It was harder because when you've been in a poppy show or a poppy soap, it's quite easy to just sort of flog you onto the next poppy show or the poppy soap. And I wasn't that interested in that. I wanted to challenge myself, and I wanted to add a bit of diversity to the work. So yeah, I took sort of some smaller roles but ended up working with some people that made a bit more sense, I think, over the years. God, that was a long answer, wasn't it?
No, it's great. It's fascinating.
It's good. Yeah, it was full.
Did you feel then, I guess, that you were being kind of forced and like typecast, I guess, if you're well known for being in a soap or well known for being in a kids, drama?
Oh yeah.
Was there that kind of something you felt you had to break out of?
Oh yeah. I mean, look, I was in this soap. I was in a show that was 20 years ago now. So in the time when people thought soap actors didn't really go on to do other things other than soap, or I'd go on to do other shows, fast turnaround television maybe. And I remember thinking, but that's not what I want. So there was a real determination that I had as a teenager when I was at 20 or 22, thinking, no, but I really want something different. And I was fortunate because I was in a soap that was not EastEnders. It wasn't in everyone's household all the time. And I somehow just landed some more theatre and more film. I had a sort of period where I was away. I did a big show in New Zealand for a while as well. So I went to New Zealand and did their big flagship drama, which is a soap. And I did that for sort of 8 months, playing a sort of Scottish chef in it. And I remember just being like, well, I felt the challenge of being out of my comfort zone, playing a Scotsman and thinking, okay, I can do that. And I felt like I had to just trust that process and just try, and clearly the diversity of work was really important to me. So yeah, I guess there was a sort of determination of wanting to go after something a bit different.
Later on, then, I get, what point did you find John, and what kind of effect did that have on your career? Because I guess you've been a professional actor for years and years before even meeting John.
Yeah, I mean, it had a huge impact on my work. I think, for a start, since I've, stopped doing these sort of fast turnaround television shows or long running shows like the kids show and the show in New Zealand, I've been a jobbing actor for some time, where I've been doing some films that I really enjoyed working on, and I'd learned in the way that drama school, I think, on talking to my peers, I didn't go to drama school. Much as I always really wanted to, it just didn't make sense for me to. When I was acting, there was some stuff going on I touched upon with my parents at home, and I wanted to be off carving out something for myself. And I remember my school was particularly poor at nurturing people that wanted to go to drama school. I remember I had some great teachers that that helped me get the bug for acting and get into acting, but they all were recommending the teacher's course when it was university level. And I remember thinking, but I want to go to drama school. Like, this doesn't make sense. And they weren't very encouraging in getting people who just wanted to be a pure actor to go and do that. So I was in this Nickelodeon show at the time, and I thought I'll just stay in it. But I've always regretted not having 3 years to just make my mistakes, because all my mistakes are on screen.
Yeah.
So I learned on the job, and I learned a lot technically, and I was always interested in the aesthetic of film and TV. I didn't really know how much I loved film and TV until I was in it and doing it, because the bug I got for acting was on stage. But once I started being on set with people and realizing how that process works, and then how it looks when you watch the project back or whatever, I was like, I'm really interested in that side of things too. So it was years before I met John and worked with John, but I'd worked with Eddie Marsan, and I remember watching Eddie in back in the late 90s in This Year's Love, playing that guy who's getting tattooed, and thinking, this guy's like, he was so brilliantly wooden, but it was a choice. It was a complete choice. And I remember thinking he really stood out for pure truth. And then I saw him again in Gangster #1 when Paul Bettany's threatening him, in that scene that's really a torture scene, but there's no torture taking place. He's just questioning him. And I remember thinking, now see, this is what's interesting to me. I've been told that screen acting needs to be minimal and nothing. And here's a guy, truthfully, he was crying and snotty, and I was like, it was so real. And I was like, I love that. And then we worked together. In 2004, we did a film together, a Viking film in Iceland. And I was like, oh, and he's a brilliant guy as well. He's a really, really lovely guy. And we talked a little bit about his process and about his way of working. And then I remember just a few years ago, Dan Hubbard tweeted something out about John's philosophy of work. And I was like, well, that sounds right up my street. If it's this sort of psychology of acting, but the spiritual psychology of acting, that sounds like something I'm going to really enjoy. And so I went along to the taster session, and we worked together for a couple of years, and it's never done. Like, it's one of those things where I feel like it's not like I'll work with John and then you park it. I want to keep working with John, and I've got a lot from it. And we had the 2 years, and then that film job I did last year.
Yeah, and you did the course over 2 years, so you studied all the modules, and you did some private sessions as well, which were great. I think you found them really insightful.
Yeah,
and found out a lot about yourself. A lot of things clicked into place. I seem to remember. But then, what was really interesting is that I helped you prepare for some parts. There was a film role.
Yeah,
was it last summer?
Year, yeah,
it was last summer.
Last year was particularly busy. Thank God, after the pandemic, and and actually been a crunchy, bit of time just before it. I've done some lovely work over the years and worked with some lovely people, but I'm a jobbing actor, and it's we all know what that's like. When you're sort of scratching your backside 1 minute, and then all of a sudden there's some work, and it's about being prepared all the time. And I think meditation sort of grounded me for that preparation. And then last year, my son was born. My wife and I had a son, and I remember just thinking, it's funny. I remember going to a screen test basically for this film job, and my son Ambrose was 3 days old. So I'd done a bunch of tapes. I'd done a second tape, and then they said, "Look, the producers are flying in from Israel. The director, can you turn up at this screen test? It's just you and the actress." And I was like, "Well, I can't say yes to that at the moment because my wife might be going into labour this weekend. She's due, And they were like, "Well, when will you know?" I said, "Well, I won't know." There's I don't know if you've ever experienced birth before.
Not something you're in control of, yeah.
No. And so and our son was born Saturday night, coming into Sunday. They flew in, and I had the screen test on the Tuesday or Wednesday. And I remember I'd done loads of work for this part. It was a biopic film to play the lead. And I'd done lots of work. We'd done lots of work in the taping and everything. I felt quite aligned with I felt like I understood the character quite well. But I remember going to the audition, and this I've never felt in my life. I'd done all the work, so I felt properly prepared. And I was so high off the birth of my son that I couldn't give a fuck what the result was. And yet I knew I really wanted that job. But actually there was something that was completely released at the same time. And I went along, and just the director and I got on like a house on fire. Was really, really lovely. But it was an old-fashioned screen test. So in the film, by the end of the movie, I'm 55. So they had to grey me up and make me look. And they were like, "Oh, he looks a bit young." I always look quite young. And I'm not sure. And I could tell they were worried about how old I looked. And then the following day, my agent said, "Well, you've been offered this series with Sheridan Smith, with a writer that I know." And I was like, "Well, what do I do about this film job?" And he said, "Well, we might have an answer by the end of the day on that as well." So I wanted to take the comedy show because I knew I'd be in England. My son was just born. If I did the film, I was really worried about going away for 10 weeks. And they came back and they said, "It's not gone your way." And I was like, "Oh, okay, great. I'll be around." And then I remember it got to my birthday a few months later, and I was talking to my brother. I was in the garden, and I said, "I don't think that film's gone away." And he's like, "The film that was going to happen in March, you think that hasn't gone away?" I was like, my brother works in the industry as well, but behind the camera in a football capacity. And I said, "Yeah, I just got a feeling about it. I don't know why. I don't know, but I just feel like that part's mine." My agent called me the next day and said, "That film that we thought was going to, they just pushed it down the line. And so, yeah, they want you for it." And so my son was now 4 months old. So it was an easier prospect for me going away at that point.
And was that like the first lead part in an independent feature film that you played?
No, so it was the biggest. So like I've done a few lead roles in some indie films, and they're okay. Like they're quite small films, under $1 million, probably £1 million. And I've done some small American roles in some big films over the years. But this was a sort of $5 million budget independent film. Wonderful Israeli director that's got a beautiful career in Israel. And I loved him. I loved his film. I'd watched, already. And then meeting him, I was like, wow, I really want to work with him. And so it was a big opportunity for me. It's the biggest opportunity that I've had in recent years in terms of, playing a guy who's still alive, a New Yorker, a tech entrepreneur, Rob Ryan. And so I went to Serbia, went to Belgrade, and we made this movie for about 9 weeks. And I then went and caught up with John and said, "Look, I really need to unpack this guy with you." And I was reading over some notes that I made because for those of you that are interested or know about John's work, will understand this idea of mind triad, right? But that for those of you that maybe haven't done John's work, that psychological profiling of the character really helped me to create this guy because he's a tech genius. He created a company called Ascend in the 90s. He sold Ascend in '94 for 28 billion, but no one knows his story, and he's responsible for how we use the internet today, because there was a point when, even though he didn't create the internet, it was going to sort of combust in the late 80s, early 90s, and people didn't really know what to do with it. People were using it for emails, the military were using it, and Rob created this company that sped it all up, and boring work in some ways because it's just like modems, but he really changed the internet. And actually, we're here on Zoom, right, doing this, having this chat.
Yeah.
Rob created like the fastest and best video conferencing in businesses. So this was a film essentially about a guy who built a communication empire, but struggled with communication in his personal life, in his marriage, and in his life. So it was a fascinating character to work on, and especially as he's alive and well and a real guy, and getting to draw on who he is, but still play the character in the writing is the crucial bit.
Yeah. What was the effect of using the spiritual psychology of acting and what you'd learned? Obviously, you've been jobbing as an actor, for a long time since childhood, and then suddenly you've got this more sort of concrete approach. What effect was that, and what was it like actually using the work in rehearsal and on set? What was your experience of that?
First of all, it's this sort of like, as an actor before that, like you a lot of it is you still read the piece and you go on instinct and you try and create the character based on instinct. Working solely from that mind triad, so for example, I'm not talking about the real Rob here, but I'm talking about the Rob in the writing. I was like, okay, so I looked at some of Rob's real life, and then the Rob that's presented as being quite a challenging human being, a person who is quite volatile. And I was like, okay, so where does this come from? And so creating that mind triad, I was looking at it. I've got it here. I've got the mind triad that we settled on after this work. Can you see that?
No, what is it?
Because I'm a nerdy freak, I want to succeed, to be acknowledged, and ultimately to be acknowledged, to belong with my father.
Right.
Because then we talked about him being atoning. The real Rob went to Cornell, and he came from quite a working class Irish American background too. But he was super smart. When he was applying for universities, his father was like, well, where are you going to go? And he said, well, here and here. And he's like, do you want to go there? And he said, no, I want to go to Cornell. And he said, but we can't afford it. And his dad said to him, you get in. It's my job to work out how to afford it. And that stayed with me. That conversation, that real conversation they had, which is not in the script, really stayed with me. And that idea that then he felt that he needed to really, that he was some kind of burden, and that he had to sort of atone for the fact that his parents had to work away to pay for this for him. And in the film, he's presented as someone who struggles to communicate. The real Rob is he was a very effective manager. He had this very egalitarian approach that when he created a new product with his team, he listened to everyone. Now, in the film, it's less like that. He's more problematic. And I had to really, that's the guy I'm playing, the guy that's in the writing. So that's why we came up with this idea that rather than him feeling like a burden, maybe he feels kind of freakish. You borrow from the real guy, you borrow bits from the real guy, but you have to play the writing.
Yeah.
That's it's really interesting you say, with working with John on that, say, the mind triad, that you describing this guy's life. It's interesting on the kind of a surface level, like what he did. But then, like you say, the story of the film is that he's unable to communicate. And that's when it becomes more fascinating. And when you read it, that mind triad, all of a sudden you start to kind of assume the personalities. All of a sudden it becomes active and alive. And that's the difference, I guess, if you were just to play the guy that you read, on a Wikipedia page, that's the difference, is that as an actor, you get to make these choices that bring this character to life that we can all relate to.
Well, it's incredibly grounding to sort of then go, okay, so what's the germ of that? And at one point I had this idea of racing driver. And actually I use that quite a lot in it, because there's moments when he is driving around and it's often in an urgent situation in the film, but I am bombing it around like a lunatic. I thought there was something quite chaotic about that. But also this idea that there's a team behind you, but you're still one person competing on your own. I think he saw his life like that. But the germ that I settled on was curious child. This idea that it had a duality. Rob in the piece of writing had a duality. And so I love the idea that someone could be an odd child, an odd, stubborn creature, but also could be an inquisitive innocent. And so that double meaning of curious child really mattered to me. And so whenever I was really struggling on set, even though I had all this, I had the sense data, I knew the actress playing my wife really well, and we'd all been working together for a bunch of weeks. If ever there was a challenging moment, I could just meditate before a take and just have curious child held really firm, and everything else, and then you get out of the way and everything else is just there.
So because I'm a nerdy freak, I want to succeed to be acknowledged.
To be acknowledged, yeah.
And then curious child.
Because there's something really needing to be recognised for him. That acknowledgement was really important.
Right.
And it's a crux of the narrative, actually.
Yeah. Well, it succeed in his capacity as well, because it succeed as in the tech, in the whole tech, in the internet and the tech world, and what he's doing.
And the piece was called The King Of. He talked about, what are you going to be the king of? It's part of his mantra. He coaches now. And it's part of his thing. What are you going to be the king of? And that idea of a king, what do they want? They want to be remembered. They want to be acknowledged and remembered in history. And I found that quite fascinating.
Did you know that the space behind your eyes and between your ears is the interface for the most powerful organic computer in the universe? The only problem is, no one ever taught us how to use it. I'm John Osborne Hughes, creator of Awakened State. We provide courses to help you to fulfill your potential and be your very best self. Starting this autumn, I'm offering an exciting new course on the life-changing principles of practical psychology that will help you to get the most out of your most valuable asset of all, your own mind. The course is called Know Yourself, Be Yourself, and focuses on the 3 higher purposes of human life. 1, to solve your problem with life. 2, to define and align with your unique gift and service to the world. And 3, to realize your true self, the infinite being that you truly are. It's guaranteed to blow your mind, free your spirit, and improve every part of your life. Join me for a free, live, online seminar where I'll be sharing the main principles of the course. I look forward to meeting you for what promises to be an inspiring and enlightening seminar.
So, Marty, you've obviously been in the industry a long time, and you've experienced the ups and downs, quite a lot of them. What would you say are the common misconceptions about the acting industry that you've encountered throughout your career?
Oh, I guess there's definitely a sort of sense from people that, like, when you work on big projects or big directors or whatever, that's really scary and tough, and it's really just great fun. It's exactly the same as it is anywhere in terms of collaboration, and it's those sorts of big American projects are kind of exciting and fun. I remember when I was sort of starting out a bit younger, you sometimes go to auditions and there could be quite difficult experiences in the audition room where some people are like, you've got to be like this, or you've got to know this, because when you get on there, it's tough when you get and you go and do it. And I remember thinking, whenever I've worked with really top level people, or it's not tough or scary, it's lovely and enjoyable and fun. And so there's a sort of, certainly when I was some experiences I had in the audition room when I was younger, there was other people panicking, on behalf of the production and and it's like, it's as if like it's a really, really tough, bad industry. I think there's also, a misconception that feels quite close to sort of my partner and I, my wife and I, when we talk about it. And certainly, look, I never went to drama school. As I said to you earlier, I really wanted to, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to work with John as well, is to go through that process and have the time dedicated to doing the work in that sense. But Emerald and I were talking about this recently, about when she started hanging out with me and my friends and my actor friends. She said to me, I remember it was really interesting because you used to talk about the auditions you went up for and no one was competitive. You'd listen and talk to each other about it and be like, oh, I went for that. And it was really open. And I think not going to drama school helped me not have that final crunchy moment with the people that I spent 3 years with, where you're all sort of broken down together from what I hear. And then in the end, you're all competing against each other. And sort of in this sort of slightly ugly environment. So I guess the misconception for me is that drama schools fully prepare you for the industry. I'm not sure they do. But listening to the way people talk, they can do, and there's a lot of focus. You get some great teachers, and you get some great focus on performance technique. But it sounds like there's not a nourishing enough experience of acting technique. And I know that my agency, for example, I'm really happy with the agent that I'm with at this point in my career. And I think that's incredibly valuable, by the way, when an agent really believes in you, because then they really can kick the door down for you if it's needed and say, well, I really believe they should be at least seen for this. I think that's the important relationship to foster. But yeah, I think there's I've heard from friends of mine and that they didn't do hardly any camera technique training or preparation really for the industry as it is. So I think there's a slight misconception there. I don't know if you've heard of like BIM Music School. There's one in Brighton, there's one in Dublin, and there's a few actually. But part of their requirements in teaching people how to be in the music industry is that everyone who teaches has to be in the industry currently. And that's an incredible prospect. And that means that you have to have a certain rotation of staff, I guess, or at least staff that will come in if someone's busy or whatever. But it means that they have to be very current and up to speed with how the industry is now.
Yeah.
And I know some really great drama tutors and teachers at drama schools now who are successful actors and so it is moving. But certainly historically, I know there's a lot of baggage that gets held through drama school, and I think some of that baggage doesn't belong to the individual that's holding it. It's inherited from some of the tutors they've had.
Yeah, I guess the problem is when it becomes institutionalized. I guess isn't it? It becomes more like a school rather than focusing on the drama part, focusing on the actual career of actors. Yeah, and
this leaning into the idea of abuse. I don't mean abuse like in terms of what we're hearing about around sexual assault. So I'm talking about abuse in that we've always done it this way, and the industry's hard. The industry's terrifying. You've got to be broken down like the military in order to be built up. I'm missing the bit where everyone's built up at the end. I've not seen that bit.
Yeah, I had a student who came to me about 3 years ago, and I'm not going to mention the drama school, but it's one of the top drama schools, and she was a kind of casualty of that drama school. And she told me, and she was really broken. And I was like, what have you been doing? She said, well, like in one lesson, we take it in turns to stand in the middle. And then the rest of the class would stand around us saying the most insulting, abusive things, personal things. And she said, and people really were encouraged to sort of release, sort of spray bile at each other and just be really, and she said that it really knocked her. And she asked, why are we doing this? And they said, we're doing it to toughen you up. And it's just like, why don't you just teach these poor young people how to act? That's what it says at why are you spending time doing this? And it's because they don't really know how to teach them how to act. They don't know how to do this.
I agree.
And the person, it sounds to me, I mean, I don't know who the tutor was, but it sounds like the tutor is some sort of sadist and just wants to see people suffer. And her local education authority were paying £28,000, or her loan was £28,000 to go there. And so she dropped out in the second year, and she then came to do my course, and she was doing the course and thriving with the course, and then she did some private therapy sessions where we helped to sort of unpack quite a lot of it and a lot of sort of the effect of the trauma of the abuse, etc. And now she's thriving. Now she's of course she's working regularly and she's doing some really good stuff. But I was really shocked to hear what that is. It is not just figuratively abusive. It was like it was literally just pure abuse, and you wonder, what has this got to do with acting? Nothing at all.
But also, the thing about it for me, it makes my blood boil listening to that stuff. But especially when I think, well, I don't know what part of the industry that's preparing you for. I can't spot the part of the industry it's preparing you for. I mean, the hardest thing is probably not getting a job. Right? That's the hardest thing that you have to face all the time. And even that's really manageable. And we do need more conversations about the process of auditioning. But, at the moment, there's a lot talking about self-tapes and how to prepare for things. And the whole yes-no debate about when you get jobs. It's very difficult. We need to involve everyone in those conversations, because I know that agents don't want to spend all day phoning their clients saying it's a no as well, because they'd rather be working hard to get jobs. So everyone is under pressure. And so we do need to have more conversations about how to improve this environment. But that's some of the toughest bits that it gets, is the sort of lack of information sometimes, including when you get the job, like the idea that you don't know. Sometimes things can change very, very quickly. They're like the really tough bits of the industry, but I don't understand this process of toughening someone up.
Well, you don't want that. Has the effect of, I guess, hardening people. Rather, like, actors need to be sensitive and receptive, and I guess
empathetic. You need to have a real skill in feeling empathy for people. And
it just turned her into an emotional wreck. It just had quite the opposite. And it's like, you think, well, they might say, well, some directors, they're going to shout at you and you need to be ready for it. But that's a different level of abuse altogether. And any good director knows that if you want your actors to act well, that you want them to be in a state of inspiration. And if being in a state of inspiration is being free of fear. So it's only bad directors that intimidate their actors.
Which is why it's amazing when you work on comedy TV shows or whatever, and you've got a director who can create that lightness of atmosphere on the set and keep that there. And they understand the value of it, because they want the actor to play. They want the actor to offer a funny option that's probably different to the last take. It's not about, so they keep that kind of, that gentle, porous atmosphere that means that you can find that humour. It's nothing worse than being on
an actor has to feel supported, and they have to feel free from fear for them to really do their job. And so much of directing is helping the actor to feel supportive and help them overcome their fear. As a director, that's the last thing you want them to feel.
Well, talking of directors there, then, I mean, you've had a pretty impressive list of directors that you've worked with, like Clint Eastwood and Catherine Bigelow. And what is it like working with those top directors? I mean, do you get a sense of being in a small part of a big production, or like is the approach like?
Well, the things that always stick in my mind about working with those particular two that you mentioned, but all of the sort of poppy, bigger, sort of famous directors that I worked with over the years, is they're incredibly charming and warm. There is that comfort that's found. I mean, being on Clint Eastwood's set, I was only in it. So I was working in Iceland with Eddie 20 years ago. And then the following summer, I came back to Iceland and did a tiny part in this Clint Eastwood movie, Flags of Our Fathers. And I was only in like a few scenes. I think I was cut out. I'm only in one scene with Ryan Felipe. And I was working with some of the Icelandic crew that I'd worked with the year before on this other Viking movie. So it's great seeing everyone. The difference on that set, it's the calmest set I've ever been on in my life. And there's lots of stories. Tom Hanks has talked about it on Graham Norton, and Judi Dench has talked about, this sort of the idea of Eastwood's process of being, he doesn't say action, he just sort of says, in your own time, and it's all of it's true. All of what they're saying is really true. But it feels so conducive to doing your best work, because it's such a relaxed atmosphere. I remember going onto the set on my first day there, seeing some of the guys I worked with the previous year, thinking this is very different. And I remember looking around saying to myself, I don't know who the first assistant director is. Now, for people that aren't working in film and TV, the first assistant director is essentially the mouthpiece for the director, but they work for the producer. So their job is to keep everything moving to schedule. And they have a really lovely collaborative relationship with the director, and they're sort of the non-commissioned officer, if you like, for getting stuff done. So they're the sort of lieutenant on set. Yeah. And normally they can be, you get a range of different character types. You get some people, some barking orders sometimes, and you get some first assistants who love to be the bad guy on set, and you get others that are really like kind of jovial and quite, big characters. I just couldn't spot the first assistant on Flags of Fathers because he was so calm, so relaxed. And it just means that you do feel safe. You do feel safe to bring stuff. And I remember it was very similar with Catherine Bigelow. I was only in a few scenes in Zero Dark 30, and I was playing Stephen Delaney's assistant. And she introduced me to loads of the crew when I came on, as if we were old friends. And and she'd only ever cast me from seeing a tape. I'd not even seen her in the room, unlike with some other projects. And so she made me feel really like, you're supposed to be here. Like this is your set. And there's something incredibly generous about that for someone who's got a lot going on and a lot in their mind at that time. But it does mean that you can. One of the hardest things for an actor is trying to get out of your own way. But when someone creates that atmosphere at work, it's much easier to get out of your own way.
Yeah.
You can just be free to bring it, I think.
That's why we start every class. Every class starts with meditation.
Yeah, it's so important.
You just bring people back to themselves. They just let go of all their tension, whatever's going on in their lives. They come back to it. They remember themselves. They rest in the self. They're refreshed. And then we go to play, and we create the characters, and now they're free.
And that's a practice that's come up for me a lot from being on set, post-working with John, is that idea of just taking a moment before a take or before you go and do a scene that's really about centering yourself through meditation, and just be like, I can just get rid of that. I can literally breathe all of that out. And that process of offering up the take to everyone else. In my case, when I was on the film last year, I was offering up my take to God and to my son. But offering the work outside of yourself and just surrendering, and that is a huge benefit, I think.
Yeah, I remember going to hear a talk in my philosophy school, and with Emily Watson, and she said that this is something that she said, I realise I've never really told anyone this before. But she'd learned a discipline which we call pausing between activities. And she said when the director is saying, when they're saying sort of camera, speed, action, etc., and is everything ready? She said that she would practice this little pause where, you just connect with the silence. And she said before every single take, she sounded this Sanskrit invocation. It's a dedication. It says Om, which is the sound of the absolute, Paramatmane Namah, and Paramatma means supreme self or supreme consciousness, and Namah means a bow, like in Namaste. So it's I bow the self to me, bows to the self in you. And she said every single take, she's done her prep, she's done her work, but every single take, she always sounded this Om Paramatmane Namah, and then went into the scene. So that meant that every single shot was on a personal level as an actor, was being dedicated to the universe. And that simple practice of dedicating it to the universe gets the individual ego out of the way, which of course is the biggest obstacle to good acting. It's our own concern of, how do I look? How do I sound?
Exactly.
Will the audience love me? Will they adore me? Exactly. And set her free. So that's a really good tip that anybody can use, even if you don't know the Sanskrit.
Yeah.
Is just, you can just take a very deep breath and just let everything go and just touch the stillness for a moment, and then action, and just go into it.
Well, there's something beautiful as well about like that moment where, all the, camera turning, speed, all those kind of buzzwords. It's very often it's like, okay, we're going, it's serious now. And that can tense actors up. If you manage to kind of flip those words to those are the words that are going to help you release and relax and get you ready to play, I think that's the
and
glorious way.
There's that thing of that thing of, like, when you're going on stage, that moment before you go on stage, you can feel quite comfortable in the half and preparing, but that moment before you go on stage is such an adrenaline flooding.
Yeah.
And then that becomes the scene, right? Because you sort of somehow you go onto stage and it just is like a rocket fuel. But actually, it can be really unhelpful if it's really overwhelming and really, for an actor.
Yeah.
So I'd often have that in even working on soap for years, just before going to do a take, that you still have that tense. This excitement, really, it's the same thing depending on how you look at it, but that anxiety or excitement just before the take, which can be a really addictive feeling.
Yeah.
But something about breathing everything out just before that moment, at the point where that would normally happen, means that you really can be free in the scene, and that you really can be. We hear a lot about listening to the other actor in our game, in our industry, and you do need to be connected. You don't always need to listen as much as people think, because there's layers of listening, right? If you've got a character who's got a purpose to be powerful, what they're listening for is useful stuff, not what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a like level of listening that's going on. Some characters aren't listening at all. They're really, like in life, waiting for their next thing to say. So they're doing something to somebody else. So we're taught to listen a lot as actors, and it is really important. But there's layers of your listening, depending on the character that you're playing.
Yeah.
But I love that idea of just pushing the breath out and then creating a stillness just before you're ready to go and do the scene or do the take. It just means that you can be more in touch with some of that freedom.
Yeah. And it brings an extra energy. It's the more sort of you let go and just come into surrender to the self and just come into the present, the more energy you come out with. That's the principle in meditation. It's the drawing back of the bow. The further back you pull the arrow in the bow, when you let it go, the further it will shoot out. So if you're continually coming back to this rest, you come out with fresh energy each time you go to do the job, the work.
It's a big practice for us when we do our self-tapes at home now, because self-taping can be quite demanding and quite stress-inducing, right? Especially when you've got a little one.
Yeah.
But thankfully, my wife and I are both actors, and we support each other with that stuff. But that breath out and that meditation, that pause, is something we always do before we offer a take.
Well, it's Zen and the art of acting. It's the principle of Zen is essentially is I do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Is do less, accomplish more. Do nothing, accomplish everything. Or do you see what I mean? The less you do, it says doing without doing, and it's surrendering to the moment. And it's letting the play of consciousness do the acting and getting me out of the way. And it's just a really simple tool for doing that. It's just take a deep breath and just let everything go.
And it's really useful for self-taping stuff, because it encourages a passivity to your work, because then you've got to go look back at the tapes and go, is that the one I want to send? And you're looking at it from the external, instead of what it's like. In a way, I preferred going into the room, right? If you go meet someone and then you go, right, they've got that take, I've got nothing, I've got no control over it now. That's what I offered. That's what I found in the moment. But if you're looking at it, well, is that when you start to? It encourages you to scrutinize your work in an egoic way, I think, which is not helpful.
Yeah.
So I think we find it really useful preparing for our self-tapes like that, and trying to be free from the purpose to get it right, the purpose to be perfect in our minds. That's something. Perfectionism is something that comes in. Look, it's not something I've mastered. It's an ongoing experience. I'm doing takes. I'm like, fuck, I didn't get that right. I didn't want to. It's like, you can't worry about all that. You can't beat yourself up with that. You just I'll let that pass. That's useful.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for doing this podcast. It's been a brilliant episode. Before we wrap things up, though, what advice, as someone who's been in the industry a long time, what advice would you give to actors who are just starting out, or those who need a bit of a boost?
I have a bit of a weird relationship with giving my own advice, because I feel like I have an opinion that advice is sort of the extension of ego, right? It's so subjective. What I can't talk in objective terms because there's always someone who can break the mold or buck the trend or do something different. So, but my own experience, maybe I'll pass on a bit of advice I was given, which I found really, really useful. I was talking to a guy, and they were a therapist, and they said, "What do you want to do for the rest of your life? What is it you want to be doing?" I was already an actor at that point. And I said, "Well, I want to be an actor, I want to carry on acting." And he said, "Well, then you will." It was the first thing he said, like this, "Well, then you will." And I'd never heard that before. I'd never in my life heard that. Whenever I was a young man saying, I want to be an actor, I'm going to be an actor, I'm doing this. Tough game, that, isn't it? Tough game, that. You've got something to fall back on. Have you got, you've got a trade. Or trade, mate, especially my dad's family. And I'd never heard a positive line ever come out straight away. And I was like curious, being at that really curious mind. I was like, what, huh? What do you mean? How can you say that with such confidence when I'm telling you this? You don't know me, and you don't know if I'm any good, and you all these sort of anxiety thoughts going on. And he said, because that's human nature. You do what you want to do. That's not the question. The question isn't whether you can act and will act. The question is whether you achieve it A, B, or C. So the question is whether you're in an amateur dramatic society and you're doing it part-time, around the corner every once a month or once a year because you love it, or whether you'll become a jobbing actor and it's part of your life and your income, or whether you're incredibly successful. That's the question. The question is not whether you will. You will. And so I think all I would say is, if you know what you want, right, that whole all roads lead to Rome, there's loads of pathways. If you know what you want, you'll find the pathway. It might take you 40 years. You might get there in 5 minutes. But if you know what you want, you are attached to it emotionally and you want it, and you have an offering, you have some service to give in that area, then you'll do it. So just decide A, B, or C.
And what about training? What do you think about that?
Well, the thing is that there's
someone who didn't train and then later trained. Is training all it's cracked up to be?
There's no doubt in my mind that the nourishment that I've gotten from working with your practice and your work has been hugely fulfilling and crucially useful. I think that's the thing. It's not about whether I liked it, whether it was fun, or do I feel nourished by doing that work, and has it been useful? Yes. As I said, I was really fortunate to have a really busy year last year, with some lovely comedy work as well as some film stuff, and it came into use on every project, and it will do for the rest of my career, and it's something that I've talked to you about. It's like in the American attitude around work. I want to keep. I think we've talked about this. The actor's purpose really is to find out, is to keep being curious and keep asking questions. I always feel like I'm right at the start of my journey. I've been acting 25 years this year, and I always feel like I'm right at the beginning, and there's loads to learn. So I think in terms of working with John, it's been invaluable and really, really useful, giving me a stability in the work and some concrete understanding of what I'm doing. And hopefully it's an ongoing process.
You've been listening to the Spiritual Psychology of Acting podcast. Big thank you again to Martin Delaney for giving us his time. We're off again for the next 2 weeks, but when we come back, we'll be discussing the art of directing. In the meantime, if you have any questions for us or have topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, drop us an email at podcast@spiritualpsychologyofacting.com. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, subscribe to us on Patreon, and help spread the word. All your support for us is much appreciated. But for now, take very good care of each other, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you to Charlie Robinson, she helps with the video editing and artwork for this podcast, and to Omid 16B for providing the music. The track is called Love and is available on all streaming platforms.